All right, I'm just gonna keep admitting people as they come in. So if you guys just want to wait patiently. David, I made you host, but if you want to make me co-host, I couldn't do that on mobile.
It's kind of fun dealing with a little bit different setup, but we'll be able to do this here.
Yeah, I think you can still like, oh, well, maybe you're on mobile on that
It looks
setup.
like you made me a co.
I
Oh,
just
wait,
made you
there's
host.
no option to make you co-host here.
Oh, you know what might be? It might just be, I maybe didn't do that setting on the room. So that's okay for this meeting.
Yeah, you can just allow people to auto highlight, or I can highlight people. Actually, it doesn't have the option to highlight here either. Hold on a second.
You should be able to spotlight someone.
says start video, make host. Yeah, I can't highlight you. Let me see if I can get someone else to highlight. Let's see here. Nope, can't highlight.
Well, it'll be fun.
Oh, spotlight video. It's funny. There's just, yeah, for some reason on this computer, it's a little different than the other one. So I can do it a different way though. Let me see if I can make you a admin. Let's see here, Cassie.
I know because we're in my Zoom, it's a little bit different. So
Yeah, it's all good. There's no way to make you a co-host.
it's okay.
I can put you in a waiting room though.
Yeah, you could do that.
Ah.
All right. I haven't seen Adam Brock yet. Have you? Is Adam here?
I don't see his name, no.
Okay. I went ahead and clarified on the protocol sheet as to which group joins where. Hopefully
Okay,
that will.
that's good. I also just put in. Okay. Oh, Tiffany wants me to open the room on this side and pass host. I can do that.
Yes, that would be what you need to do there.
All right, I will go ahead and do that real quick.
Okay. Yeah, then she can make her and Reddy co-hosts.
Awesome. I got it covered. Oh wow, something just happened. Oh, here we go. Start me.
And it might be asking you to admit people.
Yeah, did they want a waiting room or not? Good question. I'm gonna just, I don't actually have video, I don't have sound going on that one here. I'm going to, 2 people in waiting room. You. Brian and city repair. I'm just gonna let them decide that. I'm gonna go ahead and bring, Kathy, do you know the name of the person who's supposed to go in there?
Who's supposed to be going
Be an admin?
on the first room
Yes.
would be Tiffany and Reddy.
I have a Renee Slackley and
Yep.
Kathy Ging.
No. Oh, make sure you turn off the auto record.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that here. It is off. I'm not seeing. Oh, here's Tiffany. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, just wait until one of the 2 people that we know for sure. And then Tiffany can pass host or do co-host movement.
Yeah. Go ahead and do that. I'm just gonna send her a quick message and tell her. Okay. Let's see here.
Yep.
Chat. Just want to make sure it's a good sign. Let's see.
Did any of the people that are in, did you guys have trouble logging in using the meeting ID and the passcode? I see that you're in here, but I'm getting someone telling me that it's saying that waiting for host to start meeting. Oh, you didn't need a passcode? Interesting. You use the link. Okay. Yeah, I feel like the link is a pretty good way to join a meeting.
Okay, I got them all set up and I'm out of the meeting now.
Okay, perfect. And do we have anyone waiting to join this meeting?
Yeah, I need to, do you want me to set it to just admit everyone?
Yeah. I didn't know how to do that. It just was saying,
The easiest way to do that is a security button on the bottom. And you click security and it gives you a list and it says enable reading room. And then it says disable reading room. So you
oh,
check mark thing.
got it. Yeah, I don't know, like on mobile, it's a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Hi, Adam. So David, Adam is the one of the people that's going to help us facilitate this room.
Awesome.
The person.
Yeah, and I was wondering if y'all could make me a co-host so that I can play some music and do some breakout rooms and that sort of thing.
You know what I can do is I can actually make you host. For some reason, this account is kind of not really a fancy one. So that's the only option. So you're going to have full screen as long as you're
Works for
ready
me.
to do that.
Cassie's host.
Good to meet you, Adam. And where are you located out of?
So I am actually in Colorado.
Awesome. Well, I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida,
Okay. Cool.
the opposite of the Pacific Northwest. I have so much fun with those people these people that I have to get far away to take a little breather.
Hi, Adam. It's Julie.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for looping me in.
There you go, Adam. You have all the controls.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, you guys. I'm Christy from Southwest Washington State. We have an international flyway going over Willapa Bay, and I'm excited. This is my 4th convergence in the Northwest. Glad to be here.
Welcome.
Thanks for calling in. Yeah, so as folks are logging on, I'll just kind of introduce myself and introduce the context for what this session will be about. Hopefully, y'all have been having a wonderful convergence so far. It seems like the organizers have really done an admirable job kind of shifting everything online and setting everything up in a pretty rapid turnaround. So I'm excited to hear over the next hour and some change, some of the highlights. In the meantime, my name is Adam Brock. Like I was saying earlier, I work mostly in the unceded Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne territory of so-called Colorado. I live just a couple miles west of Denver. And I've been asked to hold space for this gathering that is about decolonizing permaculture, specifically for non-BIPOC folks. I'm guessing most of you, but maybe not all of you, identify as white. And we're going to be talking about what is the role of the white permaculturalist in decolonizing permaculture.
Great.
just a little bit about my background. I got my PDC in 2008 in New York City with Andrew Faust, and have been teaching PDCs for the last 7-8 years or so, and have in about 10 years ago, I launched a nonprofit here in Denver called the Grow House, based in lower income Latin American immigrant community here in Denver, where we were able to purchase an old greenhouse, and in solidarity with residents in that neighborhood and with their full input, we kind of transformed that into a hub for indoor agriculture and food education and food distribution. So I kind of ran that for a while, and for the last several years have been mostly focusing on social permaculture, applying these ethics and principles and design processes to how we heal our social systems. And so I do a lot of consulting for nonprofits and organizations, and a lot of justice work, mostly focused here in the Front Range of Colorado. All right, so before we get going, I always want to invite in these kind of digital spaces, especially as part of a convergence where we've probably been staring at screens on and off for a good part of the day, and maybe more than that, just a chance for you all to kind of open this session with a little bit of groundedness. So this is an opportunity, if you want, to kind of look away from your screen, as long as you can still hear what I'm saying. Find yourself in a place where you can kind of sit comfortably for a minute or two. If you are somewhere where you have a good view of the outdoors, or if you are outdoors, maybe focusing on a non-human species for a minute or two. Certainly focusing on your breath is always welcome. But either way, we're just going to take about 60 seconds or so, and let whatever thoughts are rolling through your mind from the last session, or whatever else is going on where you're at right now, to kind of move through you, and we'll return with a little bit, hopefully, more of a clearer mind and ready to dive in. All right. So now you can open your eyes if they were closed, make your way back to whatever position feels most comfortable for engaging with this topic. And at any point in the next hour or so, feel free to get up, walk around, do what you need to do to take care of your body. I know that staring at these screens for a while can cause a lot of strain, and that's definitely counterproductive to what we're doing. So my intention for the next hour or so is for us to dialogue about what is the role of those of you who identify as white or not BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or people of color, in identifying uh, and dismantling racism within the movement for permaculture and other forms of ecological regeneration in your bioregion in the Pacific Northwest. And, you know, for me, I want to name that, of course, I don't live in your bioregion. I've engaged with these issues a lot in my bioregion and in a couple other places. But I really want to start with a process of observation and assessment and hear from you all. I would love to start by hearing how do you think issues of race and racism, and maybe they're connected to issues of class or sex, but let's maybe focus on race for now. How has that shown up in your observation in the permaculture community where you live? And I'd love to, what I'm gonna do is put on some music here in a minute. And I'm just gonna keep the music going for a couple minutes while you all kind of respond to that prompt in the chat window. Does everybody know how to use the chat window? If you're on your computer, it should be one of the buttons on the bottom of your screen. All right, so here we go. And I'll type the prompt in the chat as well. All right, we're gonna wind down. You can finish whatever it is you're writing in the chat window. What I'm seeing come through is great. Really appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness and wise words. And if you can access that chat window, definitely encourage you all to take note of what people are saying, and you know, see if it applies to the community that you're in ways that you might not have thought of. As those last few chats start to roll in, I want to just start by kind of talking a little bit about terms that often come up when we talk about these issues, and put them in a little bit of an ecological context, since I'm assuming that that's something that most of us here are familiar with. So sometimes I think there's an impulse to seek diversity in our spaces as an end goal, right? That if we have a certain number of, say, people of color in our class, or at a community meeting, or maybe even in the leadership of what's being run, that means that we're not racist, we've done the work. And I would say that, you know, looking at ecosystems, diversity is a prerequisite for resilience in most cases, right? With no monoculture is resilient, that's for sure. But diversity is not sufficient for resilience. If you think about, you know, just taking a handful of random seeds and planting them in the ground in random places, or, you know, buying a bunch of different kinds of trees from a nursery and planting them in a thoughtless way, you have diversity, but is that going to be a healthy ecosystem in a year, 5 years, 10 years? Probably not. It takes intention. It takes really understanding what each one of those species needs, and going out of our way to meet those needs. And so I think what's required is not just diversity, although again, that's a prerequisite, but really equity. And what equity is, again, to go back to that analogy of a polyculture, if you think about, you know, that kind of intentional process of really kind of going out of our way to include all kinds of different species, you're going to need to know what does each species need in terms of soil, in terms of water, in terms of light, other species around it. And if there are some species in that polyculture that need a little bit of extra care or love, you know, maybe that seed needs to be cold stratified in the freezer all winter in order for it to sprout, right? Or maybe needs to be scarified, or maybe it's just really tender for the first couple of years and needs some extra water. That we're probably going to be putting a lot of our attention in that whole polyculture on that one species. And it's for the good of the whole polyculture. Maybe that species is the nitrogen fixer that's going to add fertility to the whole thing, or maybe it's the one that's going to, you know, grab nutrients from deep in the soil. But that is, you know, to extend the metaphor, that's what equity looks like in our human polycultures, right? It means going out of our way to identify what are the needs of every diverse community or sub-community or just human in our system, and really kind of putting an inordinate amount of our time and energy into meeting the needs of the part of the system that requires the most care, that needs to be paid attention to. Perhaps, you know, certainly in the case of our human polycultures, because those needs have been not met for generations or centuries. So really prioritizing the needs of the most marginalized is what I'm getting at here, and designing our whole system around the needs of that element of the system. And this should also be familiar to those of you who are familiar with permaculture as that third ethic, right? Of redistributing the surplus. Whatever extra we have, whether that's extra time, extra fertility in our soil, extra money, should be redistributed back towards the parts of our system that need it most. And while on a day-to-day level or person-by-person level, it's certainly, it can be the case that, you know, individually, a white person might need a lot of care. Maybe they're recovering from addiction, maybe they're unhoused. But if you think at the big picture, systematically, structurally in our society, the communities that have suffered from kind of patterns of domination and extraction and exclusion for generation after generation are BIPOC communities, right? There's no arguing that again and again, whether we're going all the way back to genocide and slavery, or even more recently, you know, things like Jim Crow or redlining, or even modern day kind of more subtle forms of racism. Those are the communities that are really suffering from lack of water, from lack of fertility. And so that gets to another just kind of clarification that I want to make, because I think if someone is not working on these issues day in and day out, really trying to, you know, dedicate a lot of their time to them, it can feel really scary when we talk about racism. It can feel really like it's very easy to get defensive if we say that X, Y, and Z is racist, or my community is racist. And I think that comes from that word meaning different things to different people. I think I like to think about it, there's kind of big R racism, which is, I think, generally what our overculture for generations thinks of when we use that word. And that's, you know, deliberate, intentional acts meant to exclude. But I think what we really need to be paying attention to here is what you could call the small R racism. It's all the ways that we unintentionally reinforce these patterns of exclusion, of domination, of extraction, without realizing it. And that is a different way of using the word racist, which if you haven't encountered it used in that way, it can feel like you're being accused of intentionally perpetuating. And I'm guessing that probably nobody on this call wants to perpetually or intentionally perpetuate racism. But that doesn't mean that we're not doing it unintentionally. And the real work in what I've noticed is that that second part, noticing the ways in which we're unintentionally perpetuating these things, is the work of a lifetime. It's the work of generations, in the same way that ecological restoration is the work of generations. And so it's not something that we're going to solve, you know, in this Zoom call, or even in, you know, many series of conversations in your own community, but it's something to be continuously observed and worked on. With that being said, I would love to kind of return to maybe the chat. I want to look at some of the examples that folks have listed in the chat, and maybe see if we can kind of dive into them in a little bit more detail, because I think what's really useful in this space is when we can actually ground our kind of theory that I've been talking about in real life examples. So I'm just going to take a moment, if you don't mind, to kind of go back over some of these. So yeah, let's start with what Patricia has mentioned. One of Patricia's comments in Tacoma, I ran into the impression, pretty accurate, that the founders of permaculture stole indigenous knowledge and marketed it to make money. Any of us talking permaculture who are also white were just perpetuating that. Right? So this is a great example of two people who I think we can all agree had really good intentions for healing the world, making the world a better place, unintentionally perpetuating patterns that have now rippled down through generations and created the perception that permaculture is this new thing. It's this thing invented by two white men. I think that perception is slowly being re-examined and healed, but we've got a long way to go, folks, before we really understand where permaculture came from. And you know, I kind of think about the way culture spreads is we all take the cues from the people who we learn it from. right? And so if my permaculture teacher was a white man and he talked about it in a way that, you know, this is this latest cool new thing, and that's because that's what his permaculture teacher said, and that's what his permaculture teacher said. You know, you start at the top of the watershed, and whatever is in the top, whether it is healthy or unhealthy, is going to find its way down to all of the creeks and rivers and streams downhill from that. Unless we go back up to the watershed and do some watershed restoration. And that's kind of hard work, moving that soil around and kind of saying, at least from here on, from here downhill, we're going to correct that perception. I want to share with you the way I talk about this in my PDCs, and not just the way I talk about it, but the way I really kind of proactively address it. And that's not to say that this is the right way or the only way or the best way to do it. I want to invite you all to think about what healing looks like for how permaculture is taught in your community. But, you know, right off the bat, I start by acknowledging that theft of knowledge, because I think it is theft when you're taking ideas of other communities and not acknowledging them. I do my best to acknowledge sources wherever I can, indigenous sources where I've been able to track them down. And I also try and get the point across, because this stuff is never black and white, it's never good and evil, that permaculture, in my opinion, is not only indigenous knowledge that's repackaged. There is more to it than that, right? It brings this kind of modern scientific lens, a very white lens, for better or worse, but it is, you know, I don't think there were any indigenous cultures who were thinking about things in terms of soil pH or, you know, applying this very rigorous design process using sectors and zones, right? So I think permaculture is this synthesis, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. But in order for it to be a really holistic synthesis, we need to acknowledge all of those sources, and not just that, not just the past, but it's about the future, right? What is the future of permaculture, and how are we going out of our way to plant the seeds for a next generation of permaculturalists who are more diverse than its so-called founders? And so in the course I teach here in Denver, we've designed the financial model such that what appears to be the base price is actually designed to fund scholarships for people who can't pay that base price. And so we market it, you know, there's plenty of people who can afford that higher price, mostly, but not all, white people here in the Denver area. But we use the extra revenue that's set aside not to pay ourselves more, or not to put it back into our own local guild, but actually to fund scholarships for BIPOC communities. And so in our PDC, at least a third of participants, and it's a big course because of that structure, so it's usually about 30, 40 people, at least 10 or 12 of them are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And because we've been doing this course for, you know, almost 10 years now, there's a community just in terms of BIPOC permaculturalists now of about 100 people in the Denver area, and they have their own network, their own forms of solidarity, their own critical mass that I don't need to be involved in, that it's, you know, I'm there to support when they ask me to, and I do my best to show up when I can. But there needs to be some of that critical mass of people, so that it's not like I'm the token Black dude in the class, or I'm the token Latina, because that can be really isolating. That can be really, you feel like you have to fit in because everybody else doesn't look like you, and you're always asking yourself, is this actually a thing for me if I'm the only person, you know, here? And then of course, just as important, and I saw a few people mention this, is who are the leaders of this movement? You know, not just the students, but making sure that we go out of our way to provide mentorship and training and leadership for those students, so that their pathway in permaculture just doesn't end at the PDC, but then we invite them to guest teach the next year. We invite them to host a workshop. We, you know, the things that we offer and charge other people, we offer those folks for free, right? Yeah, so that's a little bit about how I think this can show up in unintentional ways in permaculture education. Of course, that's just one you know, petal of the permaculture flower, but it's an important one these days. And I think for all of these petals of the flower, I've noticed that one of the most challenging things about dismantling racism within permaculture is the perception among those who practice permaculture that it's at the cutting edge, that it's already radical. And so, you know, we're the good people, we're trying to save the earth. So there's no way we could be doing racist things, even the little r racist things. And it's just not true. You know, I've been thinking about this for years and years, and I do racist things all the time. You know, even in putting together this workshop, I, you know, was not thinking about what it means to show up as a white accomplice, and asked things from the people of color who are running the session simultaneously to this one, that it wasn't their job to tell me. You know, they're busy doing their amazing stuff. And, you know, it wasn't, I didn't need to be asking them that. I can figure those things out on my own. So it's just a constant process, right? Of learning to not get defensive when we recognize that we're perpetuating patterns that are in line with those systems of exploitation. Just like, you know, we do this all the time when we think about our carbon footprint, right? It's like, I know that driving a internal combustion fueled vehicle is bad for climate change, and sometimes I do it, and I'm always trying to you know, take the bigger picture design steps in my life so that I don't have to rely on things like that. I don't have to, you know, order things from online, or I don't have to buy food from the other side of the globe. But this is where that kind of fourth ethic that you guys, I hope, know Dave Bainlane, who's in your neck of the woods. He writes about in his book, him and Jesse Bloom, right? The transitional ethic, that we're not going to get from here to our ecological utopia overnight. And we need to recognize that this is a process and not use that as an excuse to let us off the hook, but to say that, you know, probably for the rest of my life, I'm going to continue to make choices, whether I want to or not, that are harming our globe. And I'm going to make choices, whether I want to or not, that are perpetuating racism. And once I get over that, then I can actually do the work of dismantling it and recognizing one by one what those are. Okay. Margaret asks, Indigenous cultures weren't paying attention to soil pH or doing rigorous designs involving zones and sectors. Do you know this for sure? No, I don't know that for sure. Of course not. And when I say that, I certainly don't mean to imply that Indigenous land management was less sophisticated than what we're doing in permaculture design, because I don't believe that for a minute. I think the ways of understanding land and the ways of interacting with land in most Indigenous cultures were much more sophisticated and much more embodied, and included epistemologies, ways of knowing that that we no longer have access to, especially those of us as white people, that we need to figure out how to relearn. And it's also possible that, yeah, maybe there were zones and sectors, or what, you know, we would call zones and sectors and soil pH. So I could be wrong about that. That's just a guess. Another thing that I want to name about just permaculture education in general is that even just the way we teach permaculture comes from a white or Western way of teaching, right? The idea that there's an expert and there's people who are not experts who are there to learn, and they're sitting down listening to the expert talk for X number of hours, whether that's in a classroom or out in a farm or online, and that they're gonna kind of, through their talking, disseminate all of this important information, and we're gonna take all these notes. And once we've done all that, we now have that cherished knowledge, and we can go out and do the good work or teach it to others. And all of that is very, very European. and white American. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for at least the way I'm teaching permaculture is I'm always asking myself, how can I decolonize the pedagogy, like the way we teach, so that it's not, while still recognizing the different areas that have to be covered in a PDC, and there's a lot of them, and 72 hours is nowhere near enough to actually cover them. How do we do that? And I've learned a lot from my friends who are Indigenous, people of color, etc. Okay, Galen and Chanavi ask, don't want to derail, but I'm curious if there's space in this conversation for some talk about land back rematriation, land access disparity. Yeah, great question. I think that's a huge part of what it means to decolonize permaculture, and one of the ways in which white people continue to perpetuate the power that they have, because land, the concept of land ownership and buying and selling land is, again, it's not only unique to Western culture, but it certainly wasn't present in, at least, again, as far as I know, Indigenous cultures here on Turtle Island. And we have systematically denied access to land, ownership of land, so-called ownership of land, to people who are not white. Here in Colorado, I just watched a really revealing documentary about Boulder, which is a town near me that, you know, most of you probably know has this reputation of being very progressive and hippie, and lots of permaculturalists there, but it's very, very, very white. It's very upper middle class to upper class. And I learned that that was not on accident, you know, from the very beginning. Unlike every other kind of mining town in Colorado, which had their own huge problems with Indigenous genocide, but unlike every other town where it was kind of squatters' rights, first come, first serve, you build a shack, then you own the land, Boulder was selling the lots at $1,000 each, which you can imagine $1,000 in 1870s is $100,000 today or something like that, right? So from the very beginning, in its DNA of this, you know, so-called progressive town, was access to land by the white and wealthy. And so one of the most important ways in which we really need to lean into or struggle to figure out how do we heal this sin that is continuing to disenfranchise access to liberation is, how do we put the land back in the hands of the people who, let's be honest, probably know how to steward it better than a lot of us who have taken a PDC, whether or not they have that certificate. And there's not an easy answer to that, because, you know, ultimately in one form or another, it means, you know, where the rubber hits the road is white people voluntarily giving away their wealth and or their power. And that is very fraught and complicated. And we're really good at coming up with all kinds of excuses why I like that idea in theory, but I can't do that because X, Y, and Z. At some point, we're going to have to figure out how to lean into that and, you know, ultimately not just sell land to Indigenous or Black or other people of color communities, but to really, at least in these kind of zones of autonomy that we're creating in the permaculture movement, create the conditions where the idea of land ownership starts to become obsolete. And again, I don't have the answers to that. I don't know what that looks like. I do know that there's some promising examples. There are land trusts that are Indigenous led. I know of one in the East Bay of California. And there are other ones that I think are propping up. If someone knows of specific land rematriation projects in the Pacific Northwest, please paste them in the chat window, because I think that's something all of you all might want to look into and think about ways that, whether it's your money and you're just donating money for them to buy land, or donating actually land and ceding the title of all or part of land you own to those communities, those are the steps that we need to start taking. And just because you cede that land, by the way, doesn't mean that you're necessarily kicked off of it. but it means that you're entering into a dialogue and agreement with Indigenous communities that that you're going to steward it together, or you're going to, you are now guests on their land. Someone asked, I don't know the term rematriation. Thank you. And I really appreciate people raising their hands digitally when they don't understand these terms, because again, and I think in these movements, whether we're talking about permaculture or anti-racism, people get obsessed with all these words and jargon that if you're not part of it can be confusing. So yeah, rematriation is sometimes there's a word of repatriation, which is saying kind of a more established word for giving land back, giving it back to the ancestors. But of course, patriation comes from the Latin root pater, which means father. So the idea is that repatriation is still kind of rooted in patriarchy, still rooted in kind of the male knows best, or the male owns the land. And so rematriation is, at least in my understanding, a word that's used instead of that, that's saying really kind of giving back to the mother, whether we think of that as matrilineal societies or just Mother Earth, right? So that's why the term rematriation is often used. Something that I would love to start moving into with some of the time we have left. I really love all the dialogue that's happening on the chat window. And hopefully folks are following along with that as well as my speech, but I'm already getting tired of hearing my own voice, so I imagine you all must be as well. So if people have things that they want to say, questions that they want to bring to this group, resources that they want to share over the voice line, I'm going to invite you to just put a little star in the chat window like that. And that's just going to be kind of like you raising your hand, and I'm going to kind of try and do my best to answer people's stars in order. Yeah, let's just kind of give that. I'll kind of wrap up what I had intended to say for now, and then as people, if there's responses to that or to things we had before or questions, I'm going to ask you to put up the star. Yeah, Patricia says there's a way to raise your hand in Zoom. That is true, but the reason I like the star version is because it can show you the order that people did it in, and so that I can kind of go back through the thing and call on people in order. If you have a challenge using the chat, then we can find another way. You can take yourself off mute and just say, hey, can you put me in line? Something like that. Okay, it looks like the first star in here is David. So yeah, go ahead, David.
Thanks for facilitating this discussion. Really what you started with really is a very similar thing that I agree with, in that permaculture itself, we have taken ideas from the deciduous or from indigenous people and are utilizing it. I personally hold the perspective of kind of a non-possession based future for our world. And that when it comes to knowledge and such, I believe in energy exchanges, but I don't believe that I don't believe even the indigenous people of America, the North American people, believe they owned it either. They were just listening like anyone else. It's just kind of like you had said, the pH, that's just a way of listening. And I think we can move beyond, like you stole this from me and I stole this from you. I think we can hold space for that really it goes further than giving honor to the person who originally you learned it from, and realizing, hey, this is an amazing person, but we also need to give honor to the person that or the entity within nature that actually they looked at, So I think if we were to kind of stop and move beyond a possession-based mentality, some of these things would perpetually fall apart. You talked also about some things take time and evolution. Yes, and I believe in that, but sometimes nature can surprise us and how we can repair systems and they can perpetually have an exponential growth curve of healing, you know? And I think that can happen in the human relations. And I think one of those steps is digging even deeper and finding maybe a new pattern, not a perpetual pattern of you took it from me, so I owe it back to you, and we go back and forth. I think we can identify fraud and hurt and pain, but I think when we repattern our culture to a sustainable harmony rather than a perpetual violation system, then I think that's where healing comes. It's just my thoughts, and I'm open for criticism of my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, David. Appreciate that. I'm going to call on Blair next, and then after that is Galen and Janavi.
Let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, one of the things I've struggled a lot with in these conversations is, you know, I look at my ancestry. I think a lot of people are, you know, when we struggle, we look at our own connections to our ancestors and our own teachings that we've learned and from those people that we've grown up with. And, you know, I think that I always, you know, I look at my ancestry and I'm part Native American, and I'm also, you know, part, you know, white in several different ways. And I think that, you know, when we look at our ancestry, each person, we're all just a mix of all of these various races, I guess you could call, you know, whether, you know, somebody who's white could be a mix of whatever, German and English and Scottish. And we lose that when we give this like sort of simplified white black kind of a framework. And so I think that framework itself causes a division when, you know, in reality, a white person there is no country called white. It's a mix. They're a mixed person, and so it's just a more of a way to you know, give some identity because of the disconnection to our ancestry that's happened by the colonization of the country, but both by the Europeans and by, you know, the African Americans that are brought over, and then the Latin Americans that have migrated here, and wherever else they come from, Asia. And I think that framework is something I really struggle with, and it seems integrated into our conversations in this forum, but also just nationally. And but I do think that you touched on the idea, which I do think gets to the core of it, which is ownership. And I think that the ownership has been moved into those communities that are the colonizing communities, which are predominantly, so to speak, white. And that's where the root of the, you know, the disparity exists, is the ownership that has been passed down through inheritances. But I guess the main point that I struggle with is this sort of simplified view of the world of white black.
Yeah, thank you for that, Blair. And I'm really glad you brought that up. I want to take a minute to share kind of my thinking on that. Yeah, which is, as you noted, most of us, not all of us, in America who may present as white or identify as white are a mix of all different kinds of things, which may be European and may be any number of other things. And whiteness, I really think of whiteness as to be white is to be a person of no color. Like whiteness, like Blair is saying, there's no place that you're from if you're white. White is about placelessness. White is about disconnection from the land. Because before the idea of white existed, and it really hasn't existed for that long, it's only been a few centuries, people were German, or people were Italian, or people were Russian or Irish or whatever it was. And and before that, by the way, people were, you know, Celtic or Slavic. And really, you know, having relationships with their land that could be called indigenous, you know, really centuries long relationships of engagement with other species and farming techniques And really, you know, starting with the Romans in Europe, and then going since then, that's really when this kind of legacy of exploitation came to Europe. And so I think part of our process of decolonization is recognizing that these categories of race are self-perpetuating, whether we want them to be or not. So I can't pretend that don't have white privilege even if I don't want to, right? But I can also dig back through my heritage and reclaim some parts of that heritage that existed before my ancestors were colonized, before my ancestors were considered white, and really think about what are the ancient roots of my ancestors. And, you know, again, that because we all have very different ancestry, and some people know a lot about it and some people don't know anything about it, that path is going to be walked very differently for different ones of us. But until we figure out ways to draw from our own ancestral well, so to speak, it's going to feel we're going to continue to feel that impulse to draw from the wells of others in what a lot of people call cultural appropriation, right? Because if whiteness is about cutting off that root, then we feel that yearning for connection, for these deep traditions, and then we want to take them from other places, and sometimes those are offered generously, but sometimes they're not, and that can cause more harm. So thank you for bringing all that up, Blair. And I know what I said wasn't speaking directly to what you said, but it inspired that for me. But that's not to discount what you said, which I also really appreciate. Okay, so after Blair, I'm just scrolling back up, we have Galen and Janavi, and then someone with the 271569.
Hi, thanks for facilitating this discussion. I have been thinking a lot about land repatriation or rematriation and the land back movement, and really feeling like, wow, like I wrote a long post around the time of the fires a couple of weeks ago. I mean, a lot of them are still happening, but in our area, they're kind of calmed down. About like that, basically, so much of the problems that we're experiencing with these mega fires are because the corporatization and theft of the land from indigenous people into the hands of rich people, and then corporations, rich white people going under the label white. Obviously, like, I'm using white as a thing that's like, it is. I agree with you. It's something that holds weight in its power because of what it's created, but it's kind of an entity of its own that doesn't encompass people and who they are truly. But it is like, it's almost like a virus. It's like a way of thinking that has infected people in like forgetting our culture, and it's also like something we gave up. Like my ancestors, at least the Irish ones, like gave up their Irishness, gave up their language, gave up their their culture, like to get these benefits of like not being in the othered group and being led in stores. Like there was like no Irish allowed signs like a long time ago. And I'm not like acting the victim about this. I think it's just important. And a lot of people do end up acting, there's the whole like white supremacists being like the forgotten Irish slaves,
or
like,
white genocide.
Fucking yeah. I just go off about this, but going back to like, I wrote about indigenous land management and being like, wow, like all of this fires is because the land stopped being tended in a way that like allowed the beavers to be here and fed the beavers and fed the salmon, like coming back up and like giving phosphorus back to the trees, and like the beavers keeping water on the land, and like that's all held in the languages here, in the Chinookan languages, and everybody anywhere, it's like written into the language of how to tend the place. And I wrote all this this long post, and I kept referring to indigenous. We need to return the land to indigenous-led land management, and somebody pointed out an indigenous woman from the Colville area, the Colville Reservation, that continuing to say land management instead of land rematriation, land back, is like a way of holding power and a way of like not acknowledging it's actually like stolen, and that it needs to be returned. And that's uncomfortable, and I think I personally have felt a lot of fear of not having enough, again, like Genevieve said, and not having a home to be, and not being welcome where I am. And I've really been in kind of like a storm of like, how do we go forward in a way that is like equitable and gives what is stolen back while we are here? Because I can't, like, if I go back to Ireland, number one, I'm leave my entire family. That's the thing I could do, but like I'm also home here, and my body's made of this place, and I love it here, and I do want to stay. So what's the way through? And I don't want to center myself in that conversation, and I think because of not wanting to center myself in it, I haven't talked about it that much, because I just want to like give energy to people. But I also wanted to acknowledge that there's so much fear of not having a place among and I think a lot of it comes from our ancestries. A lot of our ancestries are running away from something, being like the Romans, the like Inquisition, the witch burnings, all of it. Just like we've been colonized way before and then enacted this, so we never would have to experience it again. I mean, that may be one theory.
I'd like to add something to that, just going back to what Blair was saying, and then Adam, what you were responding with, is, oh gosh, as soon as I started saying that, it started leaving. I will raise my hand when it comes back to me.
Okay, no worries. There was a request, Galen, for you to share a link to that post if you want to, and if you're able.
Sure.
But yeah, really appreciate just bearing witness to you wrestling with those questions, Galen, because I think those are the right questions to be asking, and I don't think there are any easy answers. I don't think the answer is to go back to where we came from, because of course, you know, as Blair pointed out, most of us have roots in all kinds of places, and I don't know that, you know, the end goal is to try and return the land to the way it was before 1492. That's not possible, and it might not even be desirable. We live in a different world, whether we want to or not. And so the question is, how do we live where we are, or how do we establish roots somewhere where we're not going around from place to place every year or 5 years or even every generation? But how do we really sink roots into a place, take the lead from people who have been there far longer than us? And what that's going to look like is different for everybody. Okay, so I believe the next star was 271569.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Meadow. I don't know why it's saying my phone number or something, but yeah, just wanted to kind of touch on what you guys were all saying. Blair, I thought that was really interesting about your heritage, and I sympathize with that. Apparently I have Indian in my heritage, but I wanted to point out a thing called, you know, passing as white, because even my partner is a quarter Japanese, and his grandma was in the concentration camps in America, but he looks white. And so when you pass as white, when you go into, say, like Target, people aren't going to assume you're going to steal things. Whereas if you, you know, had really dark skin and kind of look a certain way, you like, there's like these subliminal things that happen to you throughout your day and your life, things like that. And just that sensitivity towards people who can't change the color of their skin or their hair or their eyes, and kind of like just things that I've heard in my life, even like being like, oh my God, you have blue eyes and blonde hair, or like my sister and my mom talking about like, or my sister saying that she wants like blue eyes on her child and that's like a priority for her. I've heard people say that like, oh, I don't like black hair in the shower, but blonde hair is okay. Just really subliminal things that you just like hear, but you don't think anything about. And that's like, and just also talking about, you know, Galen and Janavi saying like, yeah, it's a lot to take in, like history, right? So much fucking history. But like, I think I just like to focus on what's really happening, especially in our generation. I feel like that's as much as like we can really do right now. And that really also tying back into what David said, where it's like, it really kind of starts within ourselves, and taking as much time to listen and become educated about things. Because I'm sure a lot of you guys are in the same boat as me, where you're just learning so much right now about like, yeah, Black history and like, you know, people of color and indigenous things. And I also wanted to recommend this really great book by Frederick Douglass. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's My Bondage and My Freedom. It's a really good book. So I'll write it down in the comments. And yeah, I read that and I'm just like, and yeah, just learning about how agriculture began on this soil. I think it's really important. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Meadow. That was wonderful. And please, others, put your own book recommendations. I know a lot of people are already putting recommendations in the chat, but if you have books or podcasts or YouTube videos that have really illuminated your journey in this work, please put them in the chat. All right, so David, you are up next in line, but I'm gonna skip you because you've already spoken, and go to Shael's. And after that, we're gonna kind of shift gears a little bit and start to do a little bit of a reflection and winding down exercise. Are you cool with that, David? Great, thanks.
Yeah, Shales, short for Shaylee, and Johnavy is how we pronounce Johnavy with Galen there. Yeah. A couple things, just with, that was a huge issue for our board of having that request to be a BIPOC only group, because that label is so hard. Like a lot of us might have mixed heritage or be like, what about my indigenous, like Northern European ancestors that herded reindeer, and to be really connected to that indigenous part of my ancestry that doesn't have dark skin. There's indigenous that looks and all of that. So to say, you know, but we decided we didn't make that request. So Tiffany and Riddy can decide if they want to kick somebody out of that group if their version of indigenous doesn't match. But it's within that, there's still this willingness to make space to recognize that that BIPOC term is an identity that has helped people feel camaraderie to make a stand for more rights in this world of racialized identities and injustice. So it's good that we have that now, because it's a part of our healing. And with that, it's I don't want to talk too long because I know we're short on time, but I have my family has like Hispanic and Asian and Black and all these things, and I didn't see skin color as a privilege. It always seemed about wealth and masculinity. That's where I saw this really strong thing. It had nothing to do with the color of your skin, being someone from Southern California. There were a lot of rich Latinx people and poor. It was just all about who you knew and your access to wealth, really, and being a man. And so I've always really felt like more of this subservient struggler. And it's weird to become an adult and be like, oh, I'm a person of privilege. I should start acting differently. You know, I have all this access to things. I should exploit that for the greater good and try to like redistribute that. And it's just so much of this privilege, I think, is our mind and our approach. I learned in college how men think, how we're trained to think differently as far as asking for wages, asking for authority, believing we can strive for things. And a lot of that is just conditioned by our culture. So, you know, so it's like, oh, I tell myself I need to think like a man, but then I was like, no, I need to think like a ma'am, which is like AAM, which is all of that male strength, but with this woman compassion to be aware of the struggle that I had to feel as being kind of the subservient person. And then real quick, a thing I'm working on here at this farm and with the college and different groups is to use like a nonprofit structure or a food production business and have like this capitalistic nonprofit monkey suit of an organization that can steward land and then be extremely inclusive and have educational events and invite people from the tribe. And like my friend Kriska's, she's a tribal woman that just struggles so much with addiction and displacement and all these things. And I love her, but you know, she just has a really hard time being on her feet. And I love that we made a safe place where she doesn't feel like she fits in any of the boxes. She can just come here and sleep in her car and we can pick fur tips together and just, you know, tell stories. And I think the more we can kind of exploit the systems of this white monkey suit culture that we live in that none of us relate to, but if we can learn to engage with it, we can like occupy capitalism and give it to people and make it inclusive. So anyways, that's my hope. Thanks.
Love that, Shales. Really appreciate those anecdotes and that vision. Sorry for mispronouncing your name earlier, and thanks for correcting me. All right, so we have just about a little bit less than 10 minutes left. And so what I would like to do for the remainder of this time is to kind of return to what we did earlier. I'm gonna put some music back on and just have you all do some sitting and thinking, kind of digesting, metabolizing, composting this conversation, really just letting it process, work your way through your brain and your heart. If you want to, you can go back over the chat, look, if you were taking notes, look back over the notes. And really think about what's a commitment that you want to be witnessed in making based on what we've talked about today. It can be, you know, a really small thing like I want to, you know, I want to listen to one of the podcasts that was recommended. Or maybe it's a big thing that I want to raise these issues in the organization I'm a part of, or I want to look into this changing my land tax to go to indigenous communities. But whatever it is, see if there's one concrete step that you would not have otherwise made before this conversation that you feel called to make in service towards this idea of collective liberation, dismantling racism. And once you've thought of it, put it in the chat. All right, here we go. We're just going to take another moment to wrap up before. All right, thanks everyone for participating in this conversation. I'm going to paste in the chat window. So I think there's like a Venmo tip thing. I am gonna, in the spirit of what we're talking about here, request that if you're gonna Venmo anybody, Venmo Ridhi, who's facilitating the BIPOC group right now. If you wanna Venmo extra, then I put mine in there, but please send money to her first. I also put my website, adambrock.me, and my email, wildgreenyonder@gmail.com, in case any of y'all want to get a hold of me. I do lots of online and in-person teaching on social permaculture, including but not limited to this kind of stuff. I have a book that is a whole pattern language of social permaculture, and would love to continue to be in community with you all. So thank you so much. I'll be sitting in on the conversation after this, but more as just kind of a support person. All right, well, we will see you in about 15 minutes in that next conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, generally, Cassie and I and the organizers have left rooms open for a little just kind of informal time before we switch, but I know we have to get in another room. And we've had that kind of 15 minutes of grace between sessions to leave space for logging in and getting water and all that. How would you like to use this time, Cassie? Should we allow for a few comments or just take a breather while we shuffle back over?
Have you checked in with Tiffany and Riddy? Are they ready for people to shuffle back over?
Well, I know that our other circle, I don't think it's scheduled to start until
3:30, right?
3:30. Yeah, so we have 15 minutes. I know that in a lot of our other times, there's been conversations and we felt the need to sort of respect the middle of a moment with somebody and allow that to kind of come to more of an organic ending than to be like, draw. So yeah, I think it would be respectful of us to, not hop in there until maybe 5 minutes ahead of time. But I do know that that space now has the waiting room enabled. So they have the option to not just have people jump in, which was a nice thing that if you or David or whoever set that up, that was a nice feature. So thank you for that. I think that helped. Yeah, thank you for that, David. I think it helped preserve the sanctity of that space and honoring conversations too.
They're still talking. My wife's in that group over there, so I see that she's still engaged over there.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a nice, like, easy way to not have to interrupt anybody.
Yeah.
I am wondering if there's a space for all of us here and beyond this group of people to continue this conversation, because I feel like it's really important for us to be able to do that without like asking emotional labor of people of color to like, of course, I'm really glad that this next conversation is happening to integrate and come together, and I think both are very vitally important, and yeah, I would like to continue to be in dialogue about it.
What were we to have a discussion around this topic in one of our, say, ongoing discussion groups in Slack or Discord? Do we as a group feel a more appropriate title would be Decolonizing Permaculture or Collective Liberation or something, both of them? What would you consider? I know our keynote tonight, Adju, is, she likes the term uncolonizing even more. And if we're into this topic, I suggest you come to her discussion. Very brilliant mind. I'm excited that she's here. And there is a Facebook group linked to in the chat, but in the scope of the permaculture community, our vision in having the Discord and the Slack was that we could be a very inclusive portal for connecting, where you don't necessarily have to be in the Northwest, but we have that kind of nonprofit consistency that someone should be here holding the group as a container, you know, potentially forever, as long as there's nonprofits around. Yeah, so does, nice, Permies United.
I like collective liberation. That sounds really cool. That really.
Yeah, do you think that would, like, Jonavi, do you think if we had a channel, if you saw a channel on collective liberation, do you feel like it would speak to discussions on decolonization, or should I put that in the description? Does that seem like a good?
I feel like both of those names are fitting and helpful.
Yeah, does anyone want to say it as a, I mean, are there any other suggestions?
I have heard from some friends of mine who are indigenous that like white people saying they're decolonizing is not necessarily like, doesn't necessarily have an ability to be accurate as long as we're actually just here, which maybe is a little cynical, but I don't know. I don't have a suggestion, and I don't mean to like cut everything down, but I do feel like that's another voice to consider.
Yeah, that was actually another thing I wanted to bring up, and then we ran out of time. I don't know. I don't need to even bring it up now, but
yeah,
No,
maybe
Jonavi,
collective
I wanna
liberation.
hear you.
What?
I want to hear you.
Yeah, we have a few minutes. You can
Okay. I think maybe collective liberation would be a better all-inclusive or all-covering term, and then, of course, allowing space to talk about decolonization. But it's actually been something that's been in my mind the past couple of days and wanting to just talk about it with people, because my good friend who is an indigenous Hawaiian person made this post. They were just saying like, I'm so sick of white people colonizing decolonization, and I'm like,
that's real.
So I think like, yes, we all have decolonization work to do, and that's a very important thing to look at. Like, are we just bringing this same mentality to decolonization work, and like, how do we work through that? How do we be good listeners and like taking the lead of indigenous people? Yeah, it's a question. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, there's a suggestion from Margaret in the chat to have anti-racism training be a part of it. So maybe a collective liberation channel where the discussion is like working on decolonization through anti-racism training and consent communication and nonviolent communication, that we may be deep listeners and heal. Like that kind of heart of a channel might draw the right crowd.
Oh, and there was something you said, Genevieve, about, you said, how can we take the lead? And I think that's really, we don't take the lead.
I said follow. I said follow the lead of Indigenous people.
Follow the lead. Okay. I heard the word take, and I was like, no, we don't do
No,
that.
taking the lead is definitely colonizing decolonization.
Yeah. I think a powerful thing that we
Yes,
can be doing is
sure.
giving that space for voice.
And we did record this session. I'm not sure, like, I mean, we can figure out as a board if we want to like post this as a like thing, because we are recording every session, except for the other one. We did not record the other decolonization discussion. But I don't know if we feel comfortable with posting this or how people feel. I mean, at least the chat would be nice to save, like, for all the references that people give for podcasts and things.
Right.
Yeah, we kind of made a general stance before we went into this that everybody knew that everything was being recorded. And if you didn't want to be on the record, to be anonymous. So I would have that apply to this group, since our facilitator didn't specifically ask to turn off the recording. So I would stick with just being it be a thing. Yeah, the goal transparency. I think that was a tool I think that we can use in our own lives and with any organization we're a part of, is just like, be transparent, be sharing. How can we be as radical, like push our own limits of sharing knowledge, power, and resources every single day as much as we can. I think that's one of the most proactive things we can do in our life.
You like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and for Patricia's hesitance to get on Slack, you don't need to join it, but it seems to be like a more, I don't know, deeper conversation perhaps, or a more work-related portal than Discord. Maybe Discord will be that, but that seems more of like a lighthearted sharing sort of atmosphere. And the board voted to have Slack be a way to engage with the community a couple years ago. So I've been putting almost everything on it for the last couple years that I can. And Tiffany just wrote me that the BIPOC session is done. So if we want to go over there, we can wrap up our meeting. And I will thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Does anyone have any final words? Or you want me to give you guys a minute to close down?
I really am, if I can say, I'm really wondering if, how many people here, seems like there's at least one that is not comfortable getting on Slack. How can we continue as a group? How can we continue as a group?
Meet together once a year at convergences, and at whatever we can in our community.
There's I think they still put microphones and in our phones still, and still have speakers, so we can like pick up our phone and like talk to one another. I remind my friends that like I can't always respond to texts. Just call me, and it's actually safer to talk and drive than text and drive. So.
Also, having these conversations with people who aren't like-minded with you, and you know, reaching out to people who totally disagree with you, and like having those really hard conversations too.
Yeah, and then I'm muting myself. Not banishing people for having another view. I think I've seen that a lot in the last year. Is a lot of people just being like, oh, I don't like that person because they have another view. It's like, no, actually, you need to talk to them. Like, we need to talk to them. To banish someone is the worst thing for us to do. And if someone has a very, what I would call what I would feel is a degenerative opinion, is those are the people we need to talk to the most. So like, thank you. That's like exactly what we need to do.
Yeah, this just in is that Tiffany is going to reopen the room with waiting room enabled, so we can all go back over there, and then she can pass the host back to one of us, David, Cassie, myself.
Awesome.
So yeah, so it should be open as well. And Patricia, if you like, those sorts of digital conversing styles, you might really, really like Slack because it has some great features. Slack means searchable log of all conversations and knowledge, which is why I thought it would be a great transparency accountability tool for a nonprofit to use. Because then everything we work on, anybody could come in even 20 years from now and be like, oh, when did they talk about decolonization? And all the conversations forever would show up, and then they could see what people are talking about. And you can embed documents to it and send digital reminders with this little robot. It's a really pretty cool.
Shales, I understand all of that. It really is. It's like, oh God, another one. I mean,
yeah, I
this
know.
came along as an alternative to Facebook, and then this one, and then this one, and I joined this, and then I joined that.
Yeah,
you know,
it's nice because we own it. You know, it's not like a thing that
we who.
Well, like the developing, I mean, it's not like there's no ads, there's no bigger community. It's just like an invite only portal for people who are into permaculture. So that's what's nice about it.
Yeah.
Or for whatever organization uses it. It's like organization specific. All right. I'm going to go get in the other room though, but thank you.
Yep.
It's something we've been using. So, you know, it's there. Optional. All right. I'm going to get in the other room.
Yep.
I'll stay here for a few minutes just to see if anybody else wants to, whatever. Talk, or of course, I'm not a host. But
Yeah, I took
anyone
the
else?
host back.
Okay, so that's the original link to Zoom that we go to for that one?
Yes.
Yes, the original link.
Back to the main one, and no passcode. It's like I got locked out for a while on this one.
Well, it's because we were trying to figure out things. When
You wanna put your-
Yeah, I know. It was just, I want to be in. Let me in. I felt like I was trying to break down the doors to the castle. You know?
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to suggest for the transition for the last one. If we put the passcode in the chat and everybody puts it on puts it on their clipboard, then all you have to do is restart with the new password.
Yeah, the passcode that was on the second room on the email was the wrong one, and it's like,
the email. So we had to change it after the original email came out. So the new protocol sheet is the
I
correct.
didn't look at that because that was probably over on Slack.
That's why I couldn't get in. The protocol still has.
Yeah, and then I closed that one out, and then I tried to get back in again, and at that point it said, well, the host is in another room, and it didn't even ask for the chat.
No, so there's a thing that happened. We found out that as NWPCC, we could not have two meetings open at the same time. So I have a business account, and I had to create a second one. So if you went by just information that you got in email, then it would have been wrong. But we updated the Google Drive, like the protocol Google Drive is correct.
Oh, I see. I couldn't find, as I was frantically running around, I couldn't find the other protocol. You know, I was over on the Google thing, and it was like, it's all right. I just hit my stress level.
You're like, this is where I'm at with
they
technology.
don't want me, you know. It's like,
no, I get it.
That was you, Cassie. Do that again.
Okay, I'm gonna go over and get in the other one if they let me in.
Let's see. Patricia, if you need it, if anybody needs it, there's the passcode in the chat. You can copy it, put it on your clipboard, 169944.
Oh, but that's the original one. That's room 1, correct?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
that's what we're
original,
going
that
back
passcode hasn't changed, so I got that one. I got it. Thank you. See you later.
See you
If
later.
anybody else wants to put their contact information, last chance.
And I think so.
if you don't-
People who are still here, Kathy Ging, and there's a phone number. We're going to go back over to the other side. I'm going to go ahead and end this room. Julie, if you want to copy chat and make sure you have that information, I'm gonna end the room that way and just end the meeting. So.
And so, Cassie, actually, can I just ask you really quick? Do I mean, other than with the exception of people who didn't want their contact information in Slack, do you want me to put that in the normal place?
I would put that in the normal place, yeah. Like
okay,
you have.
thank you.
Yeah. I think,
I can
yeah, for transparency, that makes a lot of sense.
like
So.
to see that side.
All right, you're good?
I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good.
See you soon.
See you soon.